Okay, Erev Tov everyone. Okay, so I thought we could round out the week with a little bit of halakha. As you know, I'm involved with Eretz Chemda. I have the zchut of being involved with some of the publications. The Eretz Chemda puts out a lot of books. Sumam Rabbanan, Emra Bazak, and Ask the Rabbi, and various others. So this is a book wasn't personally involved with the publication. Rabbi Daniel Mann puts out a series of these Ask the Rabbi questions and answers called Living the Halachic Process. But there are some very interesting and very timely and relevant questions which come up in here, so I thought we could maybe discuss some of them. And the question I wanted to look at tonight helps us to understand a little bit about tefillah. Talks about the principle of when we can daven and how much we can daven, and adding in tefillot. There's a whole concept in halakha of a tefillat nedava, which is not practiced so much nowadays, but essentially if you remember that the tefillot that we have correspond to, the Gemara in Brachot gives two explanations. One explanation is that the three tefillot we have, shachrit, mincha-maariv, correspond to the three avot. Right? Avraham instituted shachrit, Yitzchak instituted mincha, Yaakov instituted maariv. There is a second view that is brought that says that the three tefillot correspond to the korbanot, correspond to the different korbanot that we have in the Beit HaMikdash, the Tamid Shaboker, which is shachrit, Tamid Shaben Arbaim, which is mincha, and all the rest, which was brought on the Mizbeach, corresponding to maariv. And there are a number of different ramifications and afkaminot when we understand that tefillah corresponds to the korban. Right? So in the same way that you could bring extra korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash, you could bring as many as you wanted to. That's what it's called. You have a korban nedava. So in theory, you could have a tefillat nedava as well. Okay, there are certain conditions and certain requirements. We'll see. The Shulchan Aruch actually says, but nowadays we're not so into this. Right? The Shulchan Aruch says, "Harotzeh litpalel tefillat nedava." Somebody decides, 3 tefillot today aren't good enough for me. I want more. Right? Just you could bring an extra korban. I want to do an extra tefillah. Harotzeh litpalel tefillat nedava tzarich sheyehei makir et atzmo zariz v'zahir v'amid b'da'ato sheyuchal lechaven. So first of all, you have to know yourself. You have to know that a person is very scrupulous, is zariz and zahir, is very careful. Amid b'da'ato sheyuchal lechaven. You have to know that you'll be able to concentrate and have the proper intent. B'tfilato me'rosh v'ad sof, from the beginning until the end. It's hard enough to do with the 3 tefillot that we have. We're going to start adding an extra. If a person knows they're going to add in extra tefillot and they're not going to have the kavanah, so karilan bey lama lirov zivchechem. That's the pasuk we have in the Navi, where Hashem says, I don't want all of your korbanot. I don't want your extra korbanot when it's done without intent, when it's done without meaning, when it's done without your heart behind it. And he says, and this is amazing, Shulchan Aruch, v'halavai shulchan lechaven b'shalosh tefillot hakfuot layom. If only we could just concentrate enough on the 3 tefillot that we have in a day. Okay, where do we have the principle of tefillat nedava that we would introduce nowadays? So sometimes, if I have a doubt, I have some sort of a safek, if I have fulfilled my obligation or not fulfilled my obligation, or said the wrong thing, or I'm not sure, I can't remember, different cases of doubt, where you need to go back, maybe tashlumin, things like that. So then we would use the concept of a tefillat nedava to help us if we have if we need to have an extra tefillah we're not sure about. But just lekatchila, for no other reason than to just add in an extra tefillat nedava, that's not something that's really practiced nowadays. So the question here is asked, again, we'll touch on these halachot as well. The question is as follows. I was in the middle of reciting Shmona Esrei of Mincha. Right, this may have happened to some people here. It's not an altogether outlandish question. When I realized, right halfway through tefillah, that I've already davened. Person's right. This is why, by the way, this is another reason why it's very good to have a zman kavua, minyan kavua that you go to every day. This usually doesn't happen to people with shachrit, right? I don't think anyone's questions whether they've davened shachrit, but it can happen with mincha, with maariv, if you daven at a different time every day, or even the truth is, if you have a minyan kavua that you miss. Right, and then later on, I was once at a wedding somewhere, and they were davening after the chuppah. Everybody, or before the chuppah, I don't remember, but everybody was davening maariv, and the person next to me was davening. And then at the end of maariv, he looked at me and said, "Oh, I davened maariv earlier. I shouldn't have davened again." So at least if you're going to do it twice and you're going to remember, so remember when you've already finished, then you don't have any questions. But if you remember in the middle, halfway through, so the question is, what should a person do halfway through the Shmona Esrei? Do you carry on? Do you stop? Do you right? So we have questions. What's that?
Never mind.
Never mind. Right? But, so I'll tell you, for example, let's say, and this is something that happens all the time as well. Let's say on Shabbat, a person starts davening, and they realize about halfway through Shemona Esrei, when they get to the bracha of Rafa'enu or Shema Koleinu or whatever it is, right? We don't say those brachot on Shabbat. So what happens if a person makes mistakes? There's all simanim in Shulchan Aruch telling us if you make a mistake in the tefillah of Shabbat. So the first three brachot are going to be the same anyway, but it's when we get to the middle brachot. Now inherently, there's no prohibition of saying the brachot of Chol on Shabbat. Chazal changed it, right? Although we don't really we don't make requests on Shabbat as such. There are ways to get around it. It's probably not a formal prohibition as such, but it's because of the tircha that Chazal said that on Shabbat we don't say all those brachot in the middle, but we just say the bracha of Kedushat Hayom, of Mekadesh Shabbat. So if a person remembers, if a person's halfway through the bracha, certainly if they've already said Hashem's name, etc., so then you would finish, the halakha is you would finish whatever bracha you're in, once you've started, and then you would go back to Shabbat. But here the question is different. Here the question is you don't need to daven at all. Shouldn't really be saying Shemona Esrei. So we quote here three Gemarot which appear one after the other, which seem to have a little bit of a contradiction between them, and that will help us. So these all appear in the Gemara Brachot. Right? The first Gemara says as follows. So the answer begins, by the way, it says here, the answer is straightforward, but it's worthwhile to analyze the rationale. So we'll see. So the first Gemara is this. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, said a person was davening, this is our case, a person's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and they remember that they've actually already davened, right? So what should they do? They should stop. Says the Gemara, you should stop, even if you are in the middle of a bracha. Okay, so there's the case. Again, it's not the same as the case before where one made a mistake and one was saying the wrong bracha, because there you're still obligated, and then you still have to daven, so you should finish whatever bracha you're saying. Yeah, you shouldn't be saying anything. The question is, and that's the answer, halakha l'maaseh, a person shouldn't have davened, right? So you should stop at that point. But why is this a question, or why does this get a little bit complicated? Because we have another statement in the Gemara where there's a machloket here between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Elazar says that if a person is not sure if he davened, he shouldn't daven out of doubt. But Rabbi Yochanan argues, and he says, we'll see in a moment, this is actually the accepted halakha. The statement in the Gemara is halavai, that a person should daven all day long. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. If a person could, they could daven all day. So how does that reconcile with what we said before? Now, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it's very interesting. I'll read you the language of the Shulchan Aruch, what he says. In the same siman we brought earlier, but at the beginning of the siman, he says, siman kuf zayin, imu mesupak imit palel. This is before you start. The person's not sure. I can't remember. Did I daven mincha today? Sometimes I daven mincha gdolah, sometimes not. Can't remember. So he says, chozeru mitpalel. It's based on that Gemara. He says, if a person can't remember, a person's not sure. They may have or may not have daven. So you should daven. Ve'eno tzarich lachadesh shum davar. And you don't have to add in, you don't have to have any sort of chiddush. What is he talking about there? Because that's where we say that when a person, if you're going to daven a tefillat nedavar, an extra tefillah, we're going to add in some sort of a chiddush. So he says, if a person doesn't know that he davened or not, he can't remember, he should daven. But if it's clear that he already has davened, you cannot go back and daven again, without any chidush, without adding anything new into that tefillah. Meaning if a person, notwithstanding what I said at the beginning, that nowadays we don't really do tefillah nedava, but the strict letter of the law is that if a person wanted to, when Rabbi Yochanan says, halavai, a person should daven all day long, what he means to say, a person could come all day long and daven as many tefillot nedava as they want to. The same way as a person can bring as many korbanot as they want to. But there's a condition. The condition is every time you daven, it has to be clear that this is additional, this is extra, this is a nedava. Meaning if I've already daven mincha, and now I'm going to come and daven again, right, again for the sake of mincha, then I can't do. I can't daven mincha twice. Right? If the first time I daven and let's say I got something wrong, I was meant to say v'tein talumata livracha and I didn't say it, or I'm meant to say yalev yavo, whatever, and I'm not yotzi, then I have to go back again. That's not called davening mincha twice. That just means the first time you didn't actually daven, you didn't fulfill your obligation. But if a person wants to go, you can't have mincha more than once. You want to add in extra tefillot nedava. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is talking about. You can do that, but each one has to have a chiddush. There has to be something new, something different about it to show that it's not just you're not just repeating the obligation.
You mean like in Shema Kalei you should add on and want a brand new Lexus, and that would be something new.
That would be something new for most of us. That would be something new. Yes. So okay, but he says so. The point is, the Shulchan Aruch says why. If a person doesn't remember, if a person has a doubt as to whether they daven the first time or not, then you don't need to add in anything. Then you don't have to add a chiddush. Why? Because the fact that you may or may not have daven, and the fact that this may be the tefillat chovah and maybe the tefillat nedava, that's the chiddush. Okay. So that's what he says. So he says, musaf, Musaf is different. Musaf, you can't add an extra musafim of nedava. And on Shabbat and Yom Tov, there is no tefillah nedava klal. There's no tefillah at all. So now, so that's the point. All of this, the Shulchan Aruch, this is all based on the Rosh. Essentially what he says. He said like this. The Gemara said two contradictory statements. On the one hand, it said, you're davening, you've already davened in the middle, you have to stop. On the other hand, we said, Rabbi Yochanan said, a person can daven as many times as they want, as many tefillot nedava. So here, the question then becomes the following. Again, we explained Rabbi Yochanan to say you can daven as many tefillot nedava, but each one has to have a chiddush. Each one has to be something new. So if a person is davening mincha, and halfway through they suddenly remember, oops, I already davened mincha, so I can't daven mincha again. So then why can't you say, I can't daven mincha again, but if I want to daven a tefillat nedava, so then I could do. So why can't you say from that point, from here on in, so that the brachot I've already said will not be brachot levatala, therefore let me carry on. Until now I thought that I was davening mincha, but now I realize actually retroactively I wasn't davening mincha, I was davening tefillat nedava, it was extra and I can continue in that way. So we can't do that. And the reason you can't do that when you think about it is obvious. Because you have to, the same way if a person brings a korban, person starts off bringing a korban for one purpose and halfway through decides actually it's not for this, it's going to be for something else. That doesn't work. So you can't, your tefillah, from the beginning you started off davening as a tefillat chovah, and now halfway through you want to switch into a tefillat nedava. That you can't do. That's impossible. So it's too late, you've already started and it was a chovah, now you can't switch it. If at the beginning you weren't sure, so this is why actually the Mishnah Berurah says, we go back to this case where the person's not sure, right? If before I start I don't remember if I daven mincha yet or not, so I'm now going to go back and I'm going to daven. So then he says you should make it now. He says you can make a condition. You can make the condition at the beginning before you start. That's fine. So says the Mishnah Berurah what? Im lo hitpalalti teila chavati. Right? I can't remember if I davened already. So if I haven't davened yet, so there's no problem. This is going to be my mincha. Ve'imit palalti, and if I've already davened, so then nedava, then this will be a nedava, even though, that's what we said at the beginning, even though we don't ordinarily add in nedavot. Here there's a safek, here I'm not sure, here it's in order to make sure that I fulfill my obligation, that I can do. But the bottom line is, that if a person realizes halfway through for certain, right, that I've already davened, and now I'm davening again, I pray that it's superfluous, that I should not do. So at that point you should stop, and at that point you shouldn't say anymore. So one should always remember whether they've davened mincha or maariv before they start, and that way we won't get into these questions.